Okay. Yeah. Okay. So namaste and welcome. Namaste and welcome, Debbie, to the Author Experience conversations that we have with authors like you every Sunday. This is season 4. We are launching season 4 today. A very happy Easter to you.
And a happy Easter to you too, Jerry. Thank you for having me on your show.
Right. And, as we were getting ready to go live, you did inform me that tomorrow is the 10th death anniversary of George. So I think this is a fitting tribute to have you discuss your life story and tell us more about your book available as is. So welcome once again.
Thank you.
So Debbie, to begin with, tell us, walk us through your life story right from childhood to now, and what has shaped the person called Debbie Weiss.
Well, I grew up in California. I had a pleasant suburban childhood in a nice little town. My mother died when I was 10, but I had a wonderful dad who stepped in, and he's a nuclear physicist actually, and raised me, which was tricky back then because that was 1973 when dads didn't usually take over child rearing. I married my high school sweetheart, George. I'd known him since I was 7 years old, and we started dating when I was a senior in high school. He was 4 years older. He was a senior in college at UC Berkeley, and everything was fine. I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I practiced until I was 40. I'm an insurance coverage lawyer, not terribly interesting. And it was very stressful. So I quit when I was 40 and life seemed fine. George was working very hard. He was actually the tech lead on a program called Intuit at Intuit called Quicken for Windows. So he was a software guy. And things were fine until 2009 when he was diagnosed with cancer. We had a few good years, but he passed on April 10th of 2013. So it is 10 years. And from there, I was pretty lost and had to start creating a different kind of life.
So then what has it been like from 2013 to now? 10 years after George.
10 years. Well, each year's been a little different.
Okay.
I think when you're recovering from a huge loss, things change all the time. You might feel hopeful one day, another day you're lost, another day you're rebuilding your life, another day you can't get out of bed. My first 3 years were hard because my brain wasn't really back. George was in denial about being sick, so he thought he was getting better, even though the cancer was taking him, and that made his death very difficult. And I had to deal with that in the aftermath. I got grief therapy. I felt terrible for his parents because he'd excluded them. So at first I thought I might die young from the widow effect, which is where the caregiver to a surviving spouse dies within a year after that spouse because they're so unhappy that they don't really want to go on. But I also knew that that isn't what I wanted to do. And I certainly wanted to do better by my dad, who when George died was 82 and had certainly rallied when my mom died. So my dad's really my role model. He's my hero. And so I started to reach out and join groups and develop interests. And my biggest interest was writing. I went from writing classes to writing retreats to writing groups. I finally got an MFA. That's a master's degree, a graduate degree in writing in 2020. And I was 56. And, I dated. That was awful. But eventually I found love again. It's been 5 years. So I would say the past 10 years started really low with having so little hope. But by the end, things were so much better. And I have a much better, different life.
Okay. So tell us a little about your book available as is, because you kind of learned the art of writing only in 2020, you said, and then within 2 years you have a book published. So tell us a little about the book and what inspired you to write this book.
Sure. Well, the book actually I started writing it probably in 2015, with little vignettes. I wasn't a good writer. I have a website, and if you look at my early blog posts, and I hope people don't, they're very bad. So I did become, a better writer. But it took, 7 or 8 years, definitely not just 2. The MFA was because I wanted to workshop the book, and it was getting intense. The book is about creating a new life after being widowed.
Mhm.
And that includes dating, and it includes grieving, and it includes finding a voice. My
Right.
marriage to George was all encompassing. We'd been together since I was 17. So the book is about having hope and creating a
So how
life
many
on
years were you and George together before he passed?
32 years.
32 years. So after 32 years, you had to cope not only with his death, but with this entire concept of loneliness and how to cope with the how friends estrange themselves from you and so on. That's what I read in your in some of your blogs and some of your columns that you've written for several portals.
Yes, I saw that. Thank you for finding my old article on what not to say to a widow. That was fun. I haven't seen that in a long time. Yes, I did have to cope with how to create connections, how to reach out to people, how to cope with loneliness. Very much so. Yeah, I had to. That was a whole new skill set, and it's not one that people kind of grow up learning.
So, I write books where I tell stories of real heroes. And then, of course, we have the Karma Kari Karishma series, where
Hmm.
we basically feature people who are broken. Yeah, because the premise of the book is that in life, each and every one gets broken at some points and many. Yeah. So no one can escape brokenness. No one is bereft of suffering or struggle or pain or hardships or sorrow. But when broken, most give up and break down, while few persevere to be resilient and break through with grit and determination. And that's how I actually researched your story, and we wanted to feature you in that book. But if I had to ask you, what is the premise of your book, and to walk us through the several chapters that you have in your book, or how would you do that for us?
Sure. Well, my book starts out 14 months after George died, when I was going to start dating again. I
Okay.
wanted the book to be, I have a pretty wild sense of humor, and I wanted to convey that in my book. And dating was surreal, and it led to some pretty funny experiences. So I start out my first chapter, and it's actually, I think you can still get it on my website, is about filling out my dating profile.
Hmm.
My second chapter, because it has to follow, is about the first date I had as a widow.
Hmm.
And it was a disastrous date. I won't give more away. And the next chapter goes into more about me as the narrator and being such a cautious person. And it talks about how when my mother died
Hmm.
and what that was like, and how that shaped me and led to my relationship with George, and sort of where the narrator really is in the book, but at a deeper level than somebody who's ready to start dating again and dress up again. Um, and from there, we go through a few more dates and revelations about what it was like to be single at 50, when I hadn't been single or dated since I was 16, and that was in 1980. So I go through that, but interwoven are the deeper pieces about love and about loss and about becoming a new person.
Right. And somewhere you also mentioned that you became an online dating addict. What does
Oh my,
that mean? Yeah,
oh my,
I'm clueless about addiction about to online dating. So if you could just kind of tell us a little more about that, and share those insights with other people in the audience who could actually be dating addicts also.
sure. Well, when I started dating, again, this is 2014, and I was retired, so I didn't have a regular kind of real person job. It was pretty addictive because you'd go on these sites and there's all these people, right? It's infinite almost. You can spend all your time on these sites looking at people, talking with people, chatting with strangers. I mean, it's social media, right? In a way. So I thought it was very interesting to sort of see what was out there and interact with all these different people. And I really didn't know where I sort of fit into this. I mean, at least in the United States, older women aren't real visible. We're not real valued. So it was kind of surprising to me that I was starting to date at 50. And it's like, well, am I too old to this? Will I meet people? And then also as a writer, it was sort of fun to gather information. So I was just spending a lot of time online for a while there, just looking at things. And I think a lot of people do that, even if it's not a dating site, it might be Facebook or Instagram,
So
just
what
this.
you're talking about is basic social media addiction, about how people spend a lot of time online, just kind of wasting their time and being excessive about it. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about that. I'm also talking a bit about, it wasn't anything obscene, but talking to strangers. A lot of men would reach out to me and I was like, wow, this is interesting. At the time I didn't know how to screen, where, if someone says you're the most amazing person I've ever met, that means that they're pretty messed up and it is best to avoid them. Do not interact. I didn't really know the rules that online dating is really a process of extreme screening and wasting and preserving your time, not wasting it. So
Right.
I was just kind of seeing what that was like and talking to different kinds of people. I'd been with one person since I was 17. So I was sort of thinking, oh, here's a younger person. Would that be fun to talk to? Oh, this is a different site. Would it be fun to swipe? I'm 50. Is it fun to swipe on something? Well, not really. But as I was sort of looking at that, and I kind of rationalized it as gathering research for being a writer, for writing a book.
Right. So when men were paying these compliments to you, are you saying that you were looking for some validation from these men? Or so was it because your self-esteem was low after George's passing and you were really trying to find your space?
My self-esteem was very low.
Okay.
I'd been coupled for so long, I wasn't really a person on my own. And I didn't, I was so used to, if you've been married a long time, I think everybody talks in terms of we, right?
Right.
We like to have ketchup on our hamburgers. We go to bed at 9 o'clock. We never do this after this time. We do that. So it's really hard to start thinking of myself in the singular. I do this or I do that. And it was hard to be alone all the time. Suddenly my house was a small home, but it felt so empty and so quiet. So I was kind of curious, and I had professional pictures taken, so I was getting a lot of likes. They were very good. There was my old pictures out there of this redhead that looks much younger than I do now, and I was just kind of seeing what was out there. Where did I fit in? Who did I attract? What happened?
Right. Right. And that's a interesting insight because, a lot of people uh, around the world have a self-esteem deficit. And that is the reason people are always looking for validation on social media sites. And I'm very happy that you shared your thoughts with all candor so that people can get insight from that because, that's how social media predators kind of take advantage of people who are looking for validation, who have self-esteem issues, who they can bait. And I think that's a word of caution for all the people in the audience out there, that be careful about what you do on social media sites or on dating sites. I've never used any dating sites, but I've heard of Tinder and Bumble and so on, and how it swipes because I've read about it in some novels. But yes, there is a novel by uh, I think it's Joe Nesbo, where he writes about this serial killer who actually finds his
Goodness.
victims on Tinder. Yeah, so one has to be very careful. So you also mentioned somewhere in your article about dating more than one man at a time. How did that happen, and what was that all about?
Oh, well, I was raised to be a good girl.
Right.
I didn't come from a religious family, but we are Jewish and conservative. And, again, I graduated from high school in 1981.
Hmm.
So there was very much, you wanted to be, I wouldn't say a good girl, but respected, respectful. I was certainly raised, don't go to parties, and I was with my high school sweetheart. And so I'd always been monogamous. I'd been with one person for my whole life, which was wonderful, actually. Looking back, it was a great way to live. But when I started dating, most of the men I met weren't that great. And I didn't see a future with any of them. Um, this was not a success. And I started to think, well, I can do whatever I want. At this point, I'm a grown up. I don't live with my dad anymore. I checked in with him every few days, but no one's telling me what to do anymore. It's a different era. People have had so much more freedom. Um, I like to think social values have changed, although I honestly don't so much, but that's another story. So I thought, well, I can do what I want. If I want to date a few people, I can date a few people. I can go out with one guy on Monday and another guy Tuesday and another guy Wednesday. I can do what I want. And when a few guys were kind of like, well, I don't have a lot of time, but I just want to see you and you just see me, I'd be like, well, no, you don't have a lot of time. I can, I want to be having more time with somebody who's more available. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So how many years have you been dating people now?
Oh, goodness. Well, I only, honestly, I really only dated a great deal for about, oh goodness, maybe like 7 or 8 months. And then I got
Seven or
into
eight
a
months.
9 or 10, maybe 9, but it wasn't any good. And then I got in a relationship because I was so sick of dating. And that lasted on and off for about 3 years. But he was emotionally abusive. He was not a nice man.
Mm-hmm,
I go
mm-hmm.
through it in my book. And when that ended, um, that was a
You
few years later,
you
probably
also
around.
spoke about him being very possessive about you, and
Yes, he was. He was very insecure. He was not a good person. He was also mentally ill. This was a truly, I believe, a broken person,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
to use your expression. I hope maybe he is less broken. He was I hadn't realized there was mental illness in his family. He was druggy. I'm using those as excuses for him. That was probably the best parts of his character. But and then, I dated again probably for another 6 months. But, I pulled back after that because that was around 2016, 2017. And I spent some time on my own. And
Mm-hmm,
then I've been in a relationship for the past 5 years.
mm-hmm. So you are in a relationship now for the past 5 years.
Oh, yes.
So congratulations, I'm very happy for you. Yes,
Thank you.
but there were those years or months after George's passing where a lot of friends, or including couples who were friends with y'all, did not reach out to you rather, and did not reach out probably because they didn't know what to say. And
Right.
what are your insights for people who are friends with others who who face a loss, who have somebody passing away, and what is the best way to behave with people who are coping with death of a near
Well,
and dear one in their family?
well, I know people that like to back off because they think, well, it's two things. One, they don't want to intrude, but
Hmm.
also I think people are afraid to see people who, see other people who are upset, it's awkward if someone's going to start crying or something. That wasn't really my problem. I could really keep it together. I can't
Right.
say everybody can, but I think the best thing to do is reach out to those people um, in a kind way. You don't want to show up at 6 in the morning unannounced, but the best thing to do is, it's such simple words. I'm sorry for your loss, and offer a good story, a good memory of the person who's gone.
Hmm.
When George died, a few of his colleagues reached out. They wrote me letters, emails, and things, and talked about how George had affected them
Hmm.
and how much he meant to them and what a wonderful mentor he was as an engineer. He actually used to be on the phone every morning where I lived in California with a team in India every morning at 8:30 and worked with folks. So people reached out to me from everywhere to say what a great guy he was. And that made a huge difference in my life. And so I think what people need to do, it's not that hard. You reach out, and then I'm sorry for your loss, a good memory. And then because these people might be lonely, you offer something, but nothing huge. Would you like to go for a walk or coffee, a talk? Hopefully the grieving person, if they can't, that's too much. No, thank you. I'll reach out when I can. But a good walk, things that helped me were recurring things like, hey, every other Thursday, let's go for a walk.
Right.
We miss you. Let's go for coffee. Please, nothing too complicated. I had a couple crazy friends here in image conscious California who offered things like, yeah, we're going to these wine tastings in Napa. It's a big drive, meet us up and try to catch us. No, your grieving person is not going to have a huge bandwidth for things, but do offer to get together for something simple.
All right. So, and then you spoke about the 7 types of people uh, who people should not be, because the whole idea of what I am hearing you say is that when you reach out to someone who's coping with death, just share with them with warmth and remember the person who they
Yeah.
are grieving, who has passed, the person uh, whose loss they are coping with. But you speak about these 7 types: the determinists, the pathologists, the empathizers, the backseat grievers, the
Yes.
dating coaches, the
Yeah.
grudge holders, and the generic helpers. Can you give us an insight into each of these types?
Well, I wrote that a long time ago, so I'm not sure I could remember all of them, but let me try. The determinists are the ones who generally inflict their own beliefs on you. He's he's in a better place. This was God's plan. Everything happens for a reason. I mean, as I'm sure you know, and your audience knows, everybody has different beliefs. And
Right,
when you lose somebody, it's not comforting to hear that somehow their death was part of some pre-planned scheme. That's not useful. You don't need to say that, and a lot of people don't share those beliefs. The pathologists, I find this group very confusing, but they seem to really like to know about disease. If
hmm,
anybody cares, my husband died of metastasized male breast cancer, which is a very rare cancer for men. But I really didn't appreciate when somebody would say, oh, what kind of cancer? Oh, this. Well, what is that like? Well, it's like this. Well, what kind of treatment was it? Oh, it's like that. Well, how long did that last? It's like, this isn't where I want to go, right? Your griever does not want to remember each chemo session that they accompanied their
right,
partner to. This is not helpful.
right.
You know, you can leave it there. Um, the empathizers are a difficult lot. One thing I've learned talking to widows is everybody's loss is different. So my loss, my husband had a few good years, isn't the same of someone who died of a sudden heart attack, or it isn't the same of somebody who's been divorced from their spouse, and maybe they don't even like that person that much, but losing them is still very sad. So someone is like, oh, I understand your loss, and then they usually will say something really bad, like, well, because my divorce was this, and divorce is painful in other ways, but it's not the same. Or even worse things, I know it's not the same, but when my dog died, it was really hard.
Right.
Again, cat loss, I get it, not the same. So best not to say that you've been there, because you haven't. Legitimately, you really haven't.
Right.
There's a few of them. Uh,
Yeah. Then you have the
grudge.
backseat grievers.
Oh, the back. Well, I forget what that one was. Goodness, well, I think that the backseat grievers were kind of, again, I know what you're going through. Let me be there with you. I know what this is like. And again, it isn't, somehow they think your grief is more interesting than anything else about you. It
A-
isn't. You're still you,
And
you
then you have
know.
the dating coaches.
Oh, that was fun. Yeah. When George died, I was 50, and I looked pretty darn good, probably because I wasn't eating. And a lot of people, they try to be optimistic. So they're like, well, you still look good. You still look good. You're still healthy. When are you going to get back out there and start dating again? You look okay. You can still find a guy. When are you getting out there? Well, we miss our person. I joke that, spouses aren't patio furniture. You can't replace them at a Target, right? So, it's these people saying, well, but you can still find somebody else.
Right.
But, when you lose the love of your life, even somebody you have a conflicted relationship, which I didn't, you want that person. So that's, find the idea that you can go out and find somebody else isn't very helpful. It's not like you're trading in your Toyota for a Beamer or something. Doesn't work that way.
Right. So yeah, the people who tell you need to move on, right?
Right. Yeah,
With
move on, move faster. Move
yes,
faster. Are
yes.
you over it yet? Yeah,
Okay.
that's another one, is the people who are like, are you over it yet? You're doing great. And it's like,
Yeah.
don't minimize it.
You need to get over it. You need to let
Yeah.
go. Yes.
Right. That's very common in America, in the United States. I don't know. Maybe it's better where you live, but we don't like people to be unhappy here, especially in California.
Right.
So,
Right. Right. No, I remember because our mom passed last year in July 2022, and I used to keep posting about her on Facebook. And then there was this friend of mine in Goa who actually said to me in one of the comments that, "Hey, come on, Jerry, you need to move on. It's 3 months now." Well, it's
yeah.
my mom and it's my grief, and whether it's 3 months or 3 years, you don't need to say that to me. I understand where you're coming from. And then you have the grudge holders, you said.
Oh yeah, that's an odd one, but and George was such a wonderful, lovable person. But one of my girlfriends didn't never didn't warm to him. She didn't like him. And when he died, she said, well, he held you back. This is great. You're still healthy. You can go on for a new life. I mean, I guess she didn't think he was that great for me, but I certainly did. So, the person who's died, they're not going to get any better. They're not going to get unbroken. They're not going to improve, right? So
True,
if you
very
have
true.
something bad to say about the person who died, maybe it's funny, a little bit funny. Gio, it's funny the way he used to tease us about this. But if it's really negative, I would give some thought to why do you need to share that? Gee, I
Right.
never liked him, but that's okay. Well, I don't think that's anything you need to share, right?
True, I get you. I mean, it's the people who don't really, the detractors or people who are not really your promoters or people who just kind of don't have some fondness for you, who want to put you down
Right.
even after the person has passed. Yes, and then you speak about the generic helpers.
Oh, yeah. And these aren't bad people. These are people who want to help. But what they say is there anything I can do? It's like, well, is there anything? Okay. You're not going to, people, generally one is uncomfortable asking for a lot unless it's a super close friend. And, someone's going to be pretty shocked if you say, well, the gutters on my roof are really clogged. Could you come, fix my roof or something? It's better to offer, and again, people are uncomfortable asking for things. So it's like, is there anything I can do is confusing. It's better to offer something specific that someone would feel okay accepting. Would you like to go for a walk next Thursday? Something concrete. Grieving people, we get a little scattered and we don't really know what to ask for. So it's better to offer something concrete. Even do you want to get together sometime? You're thinking, well, does that person really mean it? I'm not at my best. Is that real? Offer something concrete.
So
Let's go
rather
for a
rather
walk
rather
next
than being
Thursday.
generic and all over the place, ask
Yeah.
for a specific space and how one can truly help is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Would you
Right.
like me to, your neighbor, hey, when Bob's mowing our lawn today, would you like him to mow your lawn too? We go for a few of us girls go for coffee Friday mornings. Why don't you join us? That type of thing. Something very specific with a date and a time. And again, that's small enough that someone feels okay accepting it.
Right. Great. So, one of the things that we are rolling out this year across schools in India is the Rex Karmavir Student Storytelling Fellowship, where we want to promote, the habit of reading, because to be a good
Mhm.
writer, you need to be a good reader. We want to
Yes.
promote the habit of reading and get people into books, get students, get young children, the youth into into reading books, and then teach them the process of writing and storytelling, written and storytelling as a speaker, as an orator, right? So what we would like to use this video as one of the tutorials for people to write a book, since you started writing at at the age of almost 56, you said, is when you did your course on writing, and then you published your first book in 2 years after that. So can you walk us through the process that you employed while you were writing your book, available as is?
Sure. I actually always loved to write since I was in high school. I just kind of put that aside when I became a lawyer. At least here, that killed all my creativity. But and I started to really write when I was actually in 2015, a couple of years after George died. So here's the process, because I actually do teach writing. Um, the best thing to if you want to write a fiction story, I teach more about writing true stories, memoir. But in general, if you have a memory or an idea, it really just starts with writing things down. The idea of writing a book, maybe, or even a short story can be daunting. But I think the best thing to do is to just start with writing down what you want to say. It can be a description of one person, one conversation, one memory. Again, I've taught memoir. So a good memory. And just getting in the habit of writing those things down. Another thing that super helps is you share those with friends, because sharing that, you just improve because you talk about it, you give each other feedback, you see that people are moved by your stories, and that's a value. I've taught short writing classes, and that really happens. And I've been in a writing group for many years when I was writing, and that helped too, because you have an accountability. hey, every Thursday, before I got an MFA, I took a writing class Thursday afternoons. Every Thursday, you show up with something to read. Over time, as you write more, you put those things together. Again, this isn't daunting. And as you start to read them, you see you see themes, you see plots, different things that start to come together, right? And I'm sure you've had this experience. You're writing a bunch of things, and then maybe you realize a lot of this is about your mother and about how you grew up. And what was so wonderful was resilience or her terrific sense of humor. And then slowly those things start to come together and you get a theme. One book that I always like to use because it's very simple and I think straightforward is called Shimmering Images. It's by, I hope I get this right, Lisa Dale Norton. And it's about just writing memories and then putting them together and then kind of seeing what emerges.
Right. Brilliant. And I'm happy that you're sharing your insights, because you teach writing, you teach especially writing memoirs, which is like
Yeah, I
writing
do.
your own autobiography. So, I had
Yes.
shared this PowerPoint with you, which is what I've shared with a few authors before who've written their own autobiographies, right? And as you know, I write stories which are true stories of ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things, who I think are the real heroes of the world. Yeah. And that's called the Karma Curry series. Now, this, of course, is Campbell's uh, process, if you remember, right? The hero's
Yeah.
journey. Yeah. And if you
Yeah.
see the process, there is the ordinary world, right? And then there's a call to action and so on, right? So this is these are your stages: ordinary world, call to adventure, refusal, mentor, helper, crossing the threshold, you know your allies, your enemies, your approach, your ordeal, the reward, the road back, atonement, and the return, right? So this has
Yeah.
been applied to several stories, whether they are classics, right? Or you have a book like To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a classic by Harper Lee. So you
Yes.
have Atticus Finch, who is a small town lawyer staying in sleepy Macomb, Alabama, right? And then there's the call to adventure, because there is this person called Tom Robinson, a black man who's accused of rape. So if I had to ask you to follow this storyboard and help us to tell your story as a tutorial for students who could learn story writing from you, how would you walk us through this to tell us your story, Debbie? Because earlier you told us your story in 3 minutes, while you had 9 minutes time. So to conclude, I would like you to follow this process and tell us, because you are the ordinary. For me, the ordinary world that I understand from the insights that you shared with me, from the story that you shared from me, is that you were happy in your 32 years of marriage, right? From the age of 17, you were very comfortable. You were in your comfort zone. You had worked for a few years, given up working. You were enjoying marital bliss. And then, of course, there's the call to adventure, because suddenly at the age of 50, you find yourself all alone, and because George has passed away, and this is where you need to pick the threads and move on. And but as easy as it sounds, it's not been so easy or right for you. So help us to tell the story, as
Okay.
keeping in mind that this is like a tutorial for future storytellers, students, young students, children who would write stories of people they know, so that we can feature some of the real heroes in our book. So over to you, Debbie.
Do you want me to go through each of
Yes,
these?
yeah.
Okay, I can do. Okay. The
If
Ordinary World.
if you're happy with this structure, I'm happy to keep this structure. I'm happy to keep this structure. You let me know.
I will try this structure.
Okay.
One book
No,
that to me.
do you want me to keep it in this Excel sheet, or do you want to keep it in the storyboard?
Oh, I like the pictures.
Okay, go ahead.
I like the picture. I love Lord of the Rings, and to me, Lord of the Rings very much that
Right.
exemplifies
And when you
this.
can, yes, absolutely. And I think when you can visualize how each frame looks, then you can actually tell your story better. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pretty
Paint the
visual.
big picture. Yeah.
Okay. I lived in the ordinary world in beautiful Danville, California, which is a small town, happily married to my husband, George, of 30, when we've been together 32 years. There, I had a call to adventure in 2013 when he died of cancer. This was a refusal for me because we were very insular. We were very isolated. So I didn't have many friends. I didn't venture out of my home very far. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to have to change my life. This framework works so well with me in terms of having a mentor because I had my father. He was such a wonderful man. And when my mother died in 1973, he was also widowed. And he had a 10-year-old daughter, me. And he went through and changed his life. And he learned how to be a much more patient person, a better parent. He learned how to make meatloaf. He learned how to cook. He learned how to raise a kid. He even learned how to take care of our cat in our house. So I actually did have dad. Oddly enough, he's a nuclear physicist, so I kind of think of him as a wizard. The King Arthur story also fits into this. And so Merlin is kind of a big mentor, right, in this kind of framework. I crossed the threshold when I started to reach out to people because I realized I was going to be very lonely if I didn't open the door and start meeting people. So I joined a lot of groups. It was hard, but I started to join in my community, Rotary, a car club. I had Georgia sports car. So I started to go to meals with these people and join other groups and reach out. I joined a yoga studio and made girlfriends, that type of thing. Ultimately I went online and started to date because I wanted to have that part of my life come together in a way, and I didn't want to be alone. But it was very hard, and I had allies and enemies. Allies were the lovely women I met in my yoga group and people I met when I did hikes on Meetup, and finding some old friends. But there were tests too, because dating was really terrible. This might be, again, a thing in the United States, but a lot of middle-aged men are not nice people. And they're not very positive, and there's a lot of negative energy when you put yourself out there. And that's really hard. And it's hard to have a good model for your life. And probably my biggest enemy, well, different people and also so much of this is internal, right? It's how you see yourself. My approach, I had, in general, I would consider a very good life. I mean, George left me with my home and some financial security. I lived in a lovely area. I had my dad. I had the opportunity to make friends. I was really a very lucky person. And I had to look at all these difficulties in some ways with gratitude that whatever was going wrong, I had the power to change them. If I wasn't meeting a nice person, dating, or people were negative, I could take myself away from that. If some girl in yoga, this did happen, accused me of dating this idiotic sycophant she was in love with, I could remove myself. I had all the control to change my life. The ordeal probably came when my insecurity caused me to be in an abusive relationship. I mean, I could pick different ordeals over time, right? It could have been loneliness, but basically it probably was loneliness. It was being alone. I didn't like it. And it probably was being in the abusive relationship. It caused me to be in a bad situation for a few years. I had other good things going, which was writing. That helped me to see that there were things I could do. There were people out there. But this was difficult. And this man actually was mentally ill. And I would say, it's in the book, I don't want to give too much away. He tried to kill me. I know that sounds melodramatic. I'm not a melodramatic person. I hope you can tell. But I did start to believe that if I were with this person, I could be injured. And he was never going to leave me alone. This is somebody I actually had to call the police to remove from my home. Not that we live together. I'm not that crazy. But, and my writing about that is out there. I've been open. There was a reward because once I got rid of him, I realized that I had to take more control of my life and I had to be able to figure out how to live on my own. And part of that and the road back was actually hiking. I started to join a lot of hiking groups, and those were groups of men and women. And they were nicer people, better people. And it was helpful for me to see men not in a light of dating, just out hiking. They're all of us. We don't care how we look very much. We meet up on weekend mornings. And these were a lot of people who'd been single for a long time and creating good lives. And I started to see, okay, maybe you could have a good life on your own. There were girlfriends. I could do things with women friends. I could, I did a lot of yoga retreats. I could, a few. I could hike on the weekends. I could make friends. A lot of these folks, we have a lot of free concerts where I live. They would go to concerts in the evenings. I could do that. So there was kind of a road back. And that also included writing for me. My atonement probably was writing, because I started to be honest about the bad things that had happened, and being open and taking that secret away is a big deal. I was angry as George's caregiver. He was in denial, and I had a lot of guilt. And I think that had led me to be in that bad relationship, and to have a lack of self-esteem, and to feel that I was hiding things, that I'd been a poor caregiver. And a lot of people have caregiver guilt. I hear about it. But being open about it, and I had a dear friend, Will, from writing, who I met through writing, who said he's a fellow who's a Vietnam veteran who's been sober 30 years and changed his life and dedicated it to service. And he was my friend. And he said, when we are open about our foibles, about our bad things, the secrets, the shame goes away, and we can go forward.
And that is
So
the
I
power,
decided,
and that is the power of vulnerability, as we call it. When
it
you
is
become
a power.
vulnerable to your situation, to understand that some things are beyond your circle of influence. Yeah. Very nice.
Exactly.
Yes. So that was
And
your
so
atonement. Yeah.
I started to just be really open about everything, and that led to my book, because I wanted an honest book about how hard it was to go through these things, and that it isn't perfect, and that the recovery isn't linear. There's a lot of mistakes, but you can recover. And then the return, well, that happened gradually. It was the return was that life got a lot better. I felt like myself again. I felt like I had community through hiking, and then community through going back to school and getting the MFA, and then ultimately finding love again.
Very nice. Excellent. And thank you for sharing that story so candidly. Yeah. And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. It helps you to kind of come to terms with your own situation, come to terms with your reality. When you accept and acknowledge, that things are not so right in your space, right? Which you need to
Yes,
kind of change, which you need to kind of transform. And like I always tell people, that
exactly.
is 80% of change management, or transformation, as we call it, the law of transformation. And that is exactly what the Karishma books are based on. How do we transform our lives by taking charge of our own lives? So I think the way you narrated your story, you're pretty ready, Debbie, to write your own story now, and present to us another book in the near future. So every story, if you see, I mean, I'm going to take it to the next level now. Every story, whether it's a novel or a movie script, needs a hero, needs a villain, and needs a victim, right?
Oh my.
And the hero could be a person, the hero could be uh, can be a robot nowadays, yeah, whatever, right? And of course, the villain could be a person again, or even social issues or political issues, right?
True.
Or environmental issues. And the victims are the people who get affected by what happens in the villain space, right? So, and then you
Mhm.
have the 4 P's of storytelling: plot, purpose, people, place. And since you are an accomplished writer and also a person who teaches writing, how would you advise young students, young people who want to begin their journey as a writer, to kind
Mhm.
of understand this process?
Oh, well, read a lot. I think one thing is to read, because you start to see how things follow. One of my biggest challenges in writing the book was to write things where things follow each other. For example, a date isn't a date, right? It's this woman's on this date, she's insecure. Well, why is she insecure? Oh, it's because her mom died and she was bullied in school. So from there you go from where your plot is, which is the date, to the backstory. Why is this woman in this situation, right?
Right.
You want to have a purpose. Well, why is she doing this? Because she's lonely. What happens from there? Why is she lonely? Well, here. And then you get into the themes, right? And which I think is if I find the most exciting part of writing. If anybody out there is interested, I did a podcast called Writing. It's called Let's Talk Memoir with Ronit Planck. She's brilliant. And we talk a lot about pulling the themes out of your writing, because I think that's what's the most important thing is you don't want to hit people over the head, but what are we learning from this, right?
Right.
What's behind it? You know, a book of 10 dates isn't interesting. There has to be a connection. Why are we reading this?
So what you're speaking about is, how does that story inspire? How does that story offer some life lessons, some leadership lessons, some learning lessons? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, and you don't always have to offer direct lessons, but what's the point of this? Why are we seeing this? What's at the
Right.
heart of this character?
And I
You know,
completely empathize with you. I completely endorse what you're saying, because I mean, the whole idea is that, that story that you're telling should inspire people, should inspire them to move to action so that they also start doing something and taking charge of their lives. Right.
yes.
Okay.
Or to
Anything
feel
else?
better. Yeah, to see things differently.
To see things
I mean,
differently.
when I did my MFA class, one of my teachers who was very helpful said, every story has a before person and an after person, right? You start with who you were before all the events of this story happened, and it ends where you've been changed by the events and the things that have happened in the story.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you so much for making the time to join me today. And we will be in touch with you, because we would like to feature you in the Mojosh Magnificent Seven, as we call it. Mojosh is a self-help concept that I've created, which is a combination of two words, Mojo and Josh. And it's basically about how to find your own energy and how to unleash it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
what we're doing is, we are kind of putting this huge hybrid event together called the Mojosh Magnificent Seven, where we are featuring people like you who are broken but refuse to break down. Right. Stories of people who are broken emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, and even morally. So we have a lot of people who are gangsters, who are murderers, but have completely reformed and transformed their lives and are now serving people, serving communities the world over.
Hmm.
So these are stories of real heroes, ordinary people who have gone beyond and gone for extraordinary. And we would love to have you as a part of this storytelling experience. So, any concluding insights for our audience before we pack up?
Well, just that if you have that after a devastating loss, I just would like to offer hope, right? That things can get better. It just takes a really long time, and it takes much longer than you think it will, as in my case, but that you can recover after a devastating loss and that life can be good again. And it's really a lot of it is a matter of having hope.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Debbie, and pleasure having you with us. And thank you for making the time once again. Namaste. You take care of yourself, and I hope you have found your right space. You've been in a wonderful relationship for 5 years, and I'm very happy for you. You take care and stay well. We will be in touch soon.
Okay.
You take care
Thank
and
you, Jerry.
stay in touch. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
I
you so much.
appreciate this.
Thank you, Debbie. Bye bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
I mean,
Good
have a
night.
great day. Okay, and happy
Thank you.
Easter
Yeah.
to you and all of yours once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.